Hey guys, Doug with D&E in the garage, and today I want to talk about something that doesn't really have any bearing on anything. The whole conversation, in fact, may devolve into a series of stories, but I hope you'll stick with me anyway. It's something I've been thinking about a little bit lately. The subject is naming your vehicle, right? Naming your car, and I think that's something that we do as humans that's very interesting. I know that's a big deal in the United States, and you'll have to let me know in the comments if this is an American thing, naming your vehicle, or if this is something that people do all over the globe. I expect it is probably something that we all share, you know. And the reason is this: what are cars? They're tools, you know. It's a very expensive tool, but to most of us, it's an essential tool. Most people, I know out where I am in rural New Jersey, there's no real public transportation, you know. I can walk to a pizza place and a pharmacy, but other than that, I have to get in a car and drive to anywhere I need to go. So a car is a tool, but an essential tool. I gotta get to work every day. I got a 30-mile commute. I can't walk that. There's no bus. And it illustrates the point that cars are greater than the sum of their parts to us. All right, why do we name vehicles? We name them as a way of, the same way we name pets, you know, as a way to bring them into our family. And that's what a good car will become. And some of you may have no idea what I'm talking about right now, and that's completely fine. You probably want to find another video, because this whole thing is going to be this kind of emotional stance on vehicles, you know, and car culture. You may want to find another video at this point. But if not, and I suspect most of you probably know what I'm talking about, that emotional connection that you draw with a car, you know, to the point where you name it the same way my 3 dogs have names because they're part of the family. You know, my cars all have names. Most of the cars I've had have names because they became part of the family. You know, they endear themselves on you through the times they get you out of a jam, the times they get you into a jam. I know most people name their vehicles or have named a vehicle at some point in their life. And the interesting thing is that in car culture and just in our culture in general, when you name a vehicle, there's a bit of superstition that goes along with it. You don't just bring a car home and name it, all right? You have to earn the right to name it. Most people say something along the lines of, you can't name a vehicle until you've had your first accident. I don't like that one. I think that's a very, very negative connotation. But what I do believe and what I do abide by myself is, you have to wait until you've had a situation with the car. And I can't define that any further for you. You have to define it for yourself. What I know and what I've experienced is that there's a moment where your car is a year, make, and model. And then something happens, and after that moment, it's something so much more than that. And it earned a name. It's Bessie or whatever, you know. And from that moment on, whatever that situation is, whether it is an accident, maybe if it's a brand new car, it's the first ding. Maybe it's the first time you get a flat tire. Maybe it's the first road trip you take in it. For me, it's usually the first time I spend a 10-hour day with grease up to here and every tool I own spread around the garage, where I'm spending the whole day going, I don't know if I'm going to be able to fix this one. You know, this may finally be the one that licks me. But at the end of the day, that car is up and running, and now I've become one with that car. That's what it is for me. You know, that's when most of the time I know, okay, this car deserves a name. It's part of the family now. And the names themselves are not just arbitrary. You don't just say, okay, well, I've had my first flat, and so now it's time to name the car. Let's open a baby book, and no, this car will be named Ted, you know? That's not how it works. The name has to be organic, and it really is a very, dare I say, spiritual experience. I know it is for me, you know, because cars have such a higher purpose than what they actually are. There's so much more than meets the eye. Some people use cars as a status symbol, you know. They need their car to let everyone else on the planet know who the heck they are, you know, and how well they're doing. And I don't necessarily see anything wrong with that, you know. In another conversation I may judge certain people, but that's not wrong, you know. If that's what you need to validate yourself, I would hope that there are other things, but that's fine. You know, some people make a living with a car. You know, find a guy with a pickup truck who uses that every day, and that's how he puts food on his table, and he has a very spiritual connection with that truck. You know, somebody who drives for a living, whether it's driving for Uber or whatever. You know, someone like me, I'm a hobbyist. You know, I don't make my money in any way with a car or working on cars, but cars are my release. They are my hobby, and without, if I couldn't work on cars and have that little bit of control and comfort level with one thing in the world, I would quickly go insane, you know? So when it's time to name a car, it makes sense that we don't just draw it out of a hat. The names have to come from some higher place, you know? And this could be anywhere. Maybe they're organic. Maybe they happen by accident, you know? It's obvious some cars you may call, you know, the Tank or the Beast. There's a Suburban in my town. I don't know who owns it, but it's an old early 90s barn door Suburban with the 454, and on the back in like those slant mailbox letters it just says the Beast, you know? And I totally get it. Like I said, I don't know this person. This Suburban's been around for many years, but I get it. That thing is a beast, and I'm sure in the family they probably hate driving it, because I can only imagine what an early 90s 454 Suburban gets for mileage. I'll bet you it's like 8 or 9, but when it's time for the Beast, there's nothing else that's going to do it but the Beast, you know? And that's neat. You know, that's a cool aspect. When I was growing up, my dad had a lot of cars. We had some Subarus, and he had a pickup truck that I was very fond of. But in 1999, he bought a 99 Civic, no, excuse me, 99 Honda Accord. It was the LX package. It was the V6 VTEC. It was nicer than any car that he had possibly in his life in a while. I know that he took a lot of pride in it, and it had a spoiler, had dual exhaust. I mean, in hindsight, it's not a particularly magnificent car, but in 99, I was 11 years old, and my dad called it the Rocket, you know, because it was quicker, and it was nice, and it was his new car, and he loved it, and forever, that car was known as the Rocket. It was, if you know anything about late 90s Hondas, it was that brown Accord color. I think they only made the Accord, maybe the CR-V in it. And whenever I see one, I think the Rocket, you know? It's not a fast car. It was automatic transmission. But that's what my dad called it. It was his rocket ship, you know? And to us, if somebody said, go get in the Rocket, we knew that you meant the Accord. And that car took on another meaning in our family, you know? I haven't named all of my cars. Most notably, a little bit ago we had an Impreza, my wife and I, before we were married. We had an '05 Impreza RS, the 5-speed non-turbo, you know, Subaru sedan. And I hated that car. It was too small. The only redeeming quality is that it was all-wheel drive and it was 5-speed, so it was fun to drive, but I like a bigger car. I couldn't put my dogs in there. I couldn't tow anything with it. And to make it worse, it had a bad throwout bearing, which I misdiagnosed as a bad something in the transmission. I'm not a trans guy. And so I pulled a transmission and put that in. It didn't fix it. And we didn't name that car. And when we sold it, I don't miss it. Whereas I'm a very emotional guy when it comes to cars. I miss all of my other vehicles, you know? I don't miss that car. And some of it could have to do with the fact that we never bothered naming it. I think it may have had a somewhat derogatory name that was kicked around. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I'm sure even if I did remember it, it would not be from mixed company. It wasn't rusty or anything, but it just wasn't a car for us. We didn't love it. It didn't become part of the family. We didn't name it. As a result, we don't miss it, you know? I've had cars that were far less reliable that I liked far more, and they became part of the family. They endeared themselves on me, you know? And what I'm getting at here is, it's a neat thing, you know? Cars are such an abstract thing when we start talking about stuff like this, you know? They're more than just an investment or an asset or a way to get to work, you know? So many people can all relate, you know, on this one thing. People of all different walks of life, when they look at a late 60s Mustang, they all have the same reaction. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what religion you are, what gender, what age. 99.999% of the population, I'm not a 4 guy, I'm just saying, when they look at a late 60s Mustang, or probably any late 60s, early 70s muscle car, they have the same reaction. Wow, you know? Cars are something that they bridge all the gaps. And I think that's one of the reasons we go ahead and we name these vehicles, you know. Before we had the Impreza, before I even met my wife, I had a 98 Forester. And it was a clunker. It had over 200,000 miles on it, I think. Maybe it had 200,000 on it. And when my wife moved in with me before we were married, she had to drive it. She didn't have a car down here. And she hated that car. She really did. But at the time, I was calling her Bonnie, you know, like Bonnie and Clyde. I think it's a pretty typical pet name. But she was driving this car for a while, and so that car became known as Clyde, because my Bonnie was always with that Clyde, you know, Bonnie and Clyde. And after a while, her cousin moved in with us, and he bought, as a winter beater, he bought a 2000 or 2002 Forester, and he named it Morty. And then my wife's sister, who is actually Eric's wife, she bought a 2004 Forester. And so, I mean, Foresters, they're dumpy, old, slow cars. She named hers Warren, and they were the three old men, you know? And I'm bothering to tell you this to help illustrate the point that all three of those cars, with the exception of my sister-in-law's, hers is pretty good. They were kind of clunkers. I mean, they get around. Morty is still in the family as well. But, you know, they were rusty, and you don't really care about them as much. If they get a ding, you don't bat an eye. But that doesn't mean we didn't care about them, you know? They were the three old men, and they endeared their place in our lives, or endeared themselves enough to deserve a place in our lives and in our memories and in our history. And that's a really neat thing. I'm saying all this, if you're still with me, which you are probably not, and I don't blame you. I'm saying all this because the other day my Cherokee left me stranded. I've had it for a couple weeks. I was driving home from work. I get out of work at 5:30. It's already dark in the winter. And my whole ride home is country back roads, and there are no street lights where I live. And I'm driving, and I get about 2 minutes from work, and my headlights are very dim, and my dash lights are almost non-existent. And I knew that my alternator was going or gone, or something was wrong with the electrical system. It wasn't being charged. My car was being run off the battery. So rather than try to make it home with no headlights, which would not have happened, I would have been in a ditch, I had to call for a tow. You know, luckily I have AAA, and furthermore, I wanted to be able to drive the car the next day, so I got an alternator, and I'm working on it, you know, in the driveway. I didn't get home with the car until 7:30. Then I've got the alternator. I'm putting the alternator in. In the process of that, I must have knocked the ground off. I did knock the ground off, so even once I had the alternator in, the car wasn't running properly. It was a whole process. I'm out in the driveway with tools all over the place after a long day of already working. It was the last thing I wanted to be doing. Somewhere about a half hour, 45 minutes after having the alternator in and still not having the car running, I remember thinking, do I just push this thing into the street, take the plates off, and call it a loss? You know, like what did I get myself into? You know, is this gonna be a problem that I'm not gonna be able to fix? Is this finally the situation where I'm stumped by a car and I have to just sell it as a broken car? But I put another few minutes in, and I found the ground that had come off. It was the one of the main grounds from the fuse box, and I got it running again. And in that moment, I knew this car has become part of the family. All the things I did to it, headliner, adding a leaf, wheel bearings, messing with, I've done a lot to that Jeep since I got it. That was the thing. That was the moment I knew that, you know, I was endeared to it. I would care if something happened to it. Before that, it was just some vehicle that I got from a guy down the road, and I was using it like any other tool, the way I would use, you know, an impact gun, or the way you use a screwdriver. It was just a tool. But after spending that night out there in the driveway, it was a Tuesday or a Wednesday night, demoralized, and I was cold and sweaty at the same time because it's that weird beginning of winter weather, and I was miserable. But there was no more elation in my life ever than when I turned that key and it finally started up, and I whipped it around the block, and it was primo, you know. So I was thinking, you know, maybe I should think about a name for it. Now I could name it. If a name arises, like I said, a name has to be organic. And I mentioned it to my wife, and she instantly blurted out, Little Buck. And I've been kicking that around, and I'll explain what that means. That's actually a callback to another Jeep we had. The only other XJ I've ever owned myself was lifted 4 inches on 33s 33 by 12s. It was a very large vehicle for daily driving. Great looking vehicle. The interesting thing about this is the previous owner who lifted it had not torn the fenders off the way people always do with XJs. Those fender flares, they left them. So it was a bone stock XJ that was lifted 4 inches on 33-inch Swampers, and it was a great Jeep. We actually traded the Impreza for it. The Impreza needed that throwout bearing. This Jeep had the worst case of death wobble you've ever seen. The girl who traded it to me thought that, she had ripped me off. She'd really taken me for a ride. Little did she know that a weekend of Ash and I wrenching on it, tie rods, ball joints, wheel bearings, thing ran great. The point is that Jeep's name was Buck, all right? And when I got this XJ, I remember marveling at how small it was. The only XJs I've ever been around for any extended amount of time were that one, Buck, and all my friends' XJs. And all my friends' XJs have been lifted sky high, because that's what you do with an XJ. I didn't know that stock XJs are really very small. Stock Cherokees, they're not that big. They're narrow and they're short, and it's kind of a zippy little car. Almost reminds me of my sister's Patriot. I think that the Patriot should have carried on the Cherokee nameplate, not whatever they're calling a Cherokee now. My sister's Patriot looks a lot like a Cherokee, but I'm completely off topic now. What does one have to do with the other? Well, because of how small this one is, and because my only other daily driving experience with a Jeep was Buck, Little Buck seems like a pretty decent name for it. So we're kicking that name around, and we'll see if it fits. But one thing is for sure, that vehicle has become part of the family. An interesting thing is my wife's Commander is still unnamed, and it's not because we don't like it. We actually love it. It's a great vehicle. It's a perfect size for what we wanted it for. It's nice to have a large vehicle in the fleet. But it's not that we haven't, it hasn't had a lot of problems, but it's had flat tires, and it needed wheel bearings, and it had a weird power steering issue at one point. It just hasn't, whatever reason, it hasn't organically come up to name it, and so it's not named, And maybe at some point it will, maybe it won't. I'll be interested to see, considering we do like this one, if it goes its whole life with us, and when we sell it, it still wasn't named. Will we remember it as fondly? I submit, potentially not, I think that naming a vehicle is very much that rite of passage that helps a vehicle become larger than life. They're just tools. It's just a collection of parts. What am I talking about, right? Like, what is this guy rambling about? It's just a collection of parts. It's designed to do a job, and it gets you to work, and it gets you to the store. It's like a washing machine, but a little more expensive, It's just not true, A vehicle is greater than the sum of its parts. A vehicle has some sort of magic in it, from a young age. Even if you're not into cars like a car guy, I consider myself a car guy, a Jeep guy anyway. I'm interested in tuning an engine and working on a Jeep and everything. Even if you're not at all, and I know plenty of people that aren't, they still name their vehicles, because from a young age, what do we associate as being the first step towards adulthood? Getting your license, hands down, right? Before you can drink or vote, or you're expected to have a good job and be thinking about college or whatever else your next move is going to be, before any expectations are put on you, any adult expectations, you get those keys, right? And I know for me and everybody I know, that's something you look forward to for years, and when that moment comes, you have never felt freedom like your first ride without a parent or an instructor or something in that front seat with you. There is no feeling like that first time you hit the road alone, and you have the music up way too loud, and your sunglasses are on even though it's dusk, and you just feel like I don't even know, There's no feeling like it, and that feeling is not possible without a car, right? Cars center themselves so much in our lives, and our modern lives are so impossible without cars, that it's so necessary to allow them to reach this next level of existence with us, you know? It's like a pet or a child, you know? I can tell you right now, my tan Jeep, my WJ, there's an interesting story with that, and since we're already down the rabbit hole, and this video is basically just a collection of emotionally rambling stories, I will tell you, that Jeep came to my family, but not to me originally. It was my sister's first car. She got it in high school, and I believe the story goes she named it Willie. And I remember saying, that's really interesting, like Willie's Jeep, good one. And she said, what? and the funny thing about that is she didn't know about Willie's Overland, you know, the original manufacturer of Jeep. She named it Willie for some other reason, and since then, you know, she knows and she gets it. But, you know, it's an interesting piece of his history. And after she went to college, my dad drove it daily. He had another car, but he drove it daily to keep it running. And then my mother drove it daily for a while, and then I acquired it from my father, and it's been mine. And everybody in our group, our family, our friends, friends of family, friends of friends, they know that if Willie comes up in conversation, that we're talking about that Jeep. You know, everybody knows. Nobody assumes that they're talking about a person. Everybody knows that it's Willie because he is part of the family. Just as much as if somebody says Jude, they know that they're talking about my dog. Or if, you know, or like anybody else. And it's like that with a lot of our vehicles. Eric's, his ZJ, his plow Grand Cherokee, his 93 Grand Cherokee that he plows with, is named Barney because it's big and it's slow and it's purple. So it's named Barney. And if you bring up Barney, nobody assumes you're talking about anything other than Eric's Jeep. And it's like that with all kinds of things, you know. Even people who are not in my circle in my family, which I will admit is vehicle oriented, we are car people, but you hear other people talk about their cars in ways that are not normal for talking about machine. I don't talk about my drill press like that. My drill press isn't named Ted, and I don't know anybody with a drill press that's named, or a washing machine, or a refrigerator, or an oil burner or anything. Nope, just cars, you know. So what was the point of this video? I mean, I wanted to share with you that I'm thinking about naming the XJ, and I wanted to share with you that bit of superstition, if you'd never heard it, about you have to earn the right and have some kind of situation or some bonding moment with your car before you name it. I wanted to definitely share the fact that names have to be organic, though I'm sure you already knew that. If you've ever come to a situation where you're trying to name a vehicle, it's apparent that the name will make itself apparent, you know. And I wanted to share my feelings on that. I think cars are certainly a product of commercialism. Cars would not be as important to us as Americans if commercialism was not a thing. Point blank. Very much of what drives new car sales is keeping up with the Joneses. I don't think that's a bad thing, though. I love car culture. As much as I do dislike certain brands, I do love all cars for what they are. And I think it's neat that they are so ingrained in our life, and there's another way that you can add so much meaning to your life while also getting done a necessary task, you know. In my opinion, it's the exact same thing as somebody naming a horse back in the day when horses were more prevalent and used for work and transportation. Same exact thing, you know. Cars are part of your family. I desperately want to hear some comments from you. If you made it this long in the video, I'd love to know, does this kind of practice happen elsewhere in the world? Like, or is this an American thing where you name your cars and you think of it as a member of your family? What have you named your cars? I'd love to know, you know. I've told you a lot of mine. There's a lot more. I'm not going to lengthen this video. We're probably already at 20 minutes. Geez, we're probably at more than 20 minutes. I do apologize. Except I don't. I don't know. You had the choice to not watch it. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm Doug with D&E in the Garage. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that subscribe button. I swear all of our videos are not like this. Many of them have a purpose. Hit that like button. If by some miracle you did like the video, leave us that comment. Thanks for watching. See you next time.